Ach eich ubama tigdal mailas hatshuva maisim tovim kol kach. However, how and in what will the greatness of tshuva and good deeds be greater to such an extent? Hine hu alidei beis bechinos midbar Sinai ubeohel moed. It's two concepts: the desert of Sinai and the tent of meeting. V'ha'inyan, and the concept is din eksiv, that it's written mizos olamin hamidbar shir hashirim, which says, who's this coming up from the desert? Perish midbar ulashin דיבור, that the desert is a language of speech, v'kamo shekasuv medabrech naver, like it says, and your mouth is beautiful. V'hi b'chinas dvar havaya, and that's the concept of the word of Hashem. She b'chinas malchus d'atzilus, which is malchus of atzilus, v'giloi shechina, and the revelation of the shechina shochenes betachtonim, that dwells in the lowest realms. Kamoshikaso dvar melech shilton, like it says, the word of the king rules. Umashinikra midbar b'tosefes mem, and this that it's called the desert with an extra mem, not just davar or dibur. Hainu keshi mislabesh is bibi'ah, that is when the speech of Hashem, the malchus, the dwelling of the shechina, is enclosed in the worlds of Bria, Tzira, Asiyah, as nikra kein midbar b'tosefes mem, then it's called the desert with the extra mem, psucha with the open mem, midbar. Why is it an open mem? Because then there's an entrance and an opening to the external hemaklipos v'sitra achra, and that's the klipos on the other side. To nurture and receive life force from it. That is to say, from malchus, Hashem mislabesh is by insorim, when it's enclosed in the 70 ministers. Mash ein kin mem sתומה, but this is not the case with the closed mem alma de cherus. That's the world of freedom. Cherus mem alachama v'sumishibur chulu. That is the freedom from the angel of death and servitude and so forth. Shein yochalis lehem lekabel inika v'chayus misham, that they do not have the ability to receive nurturance and life from there. That's why it says in the time to come, to greaten the measure, the word lemarbe with a mem sתומה in the middle of the word. Al kisei David, upon the throne of David, to greaten the measure of the throne upon the throne of David. Mem sתומה belemarbe chulu. Ki az yehiye giloi v'hamshacha bekisei David, because then you will have revelation and drawing down in the throne of David. Shemidas malchuso yizbarech, which is the attribute of his kingship, may be blessed. And bechinas mem sתומה, from the closed mem. So there is also a hamshacha from malchus, but it doesn't give yinika. Because then, like it says, that they will not damage and they will not do bad upon my holy mountain. Bechol har kodeshi. And similarly, you had this type of revelation of light in the teva of Noach. That's why it was also square like a mem, sתומה, and not like other boats. That it was, I guess, rectangle. It was not rounded at the edges, like other boats. Like it says in another place, Al pasuk lamar behamisar hanal. But nonetheless, there's in this midbar, the word midbar has this open mem. Gamkin shnei bechinos has also two concepts in it. Hainu ha'alef kemo shahaya b'zman shebeis hamikdash haya kaim. The first is as it was in the time that we had the Beis Hamikdash. Af shahaya haklipos v'setra achra mekablim chayos, even though the klipos on the other side were receiving life force, mikol malkum hayu muchnaim tachas hakedusha Nonetheless, they were subjugated under the holiness of Yisrael Mam Shalosav, and Yisrael were ruling over V'nikra Midbar, Meloshin Yadber Amim Tachteinu, and it's called the desert from the language of also to conduct the nations under us. So because we had the Beis Hamikdash and we were ruling, therefore, even though there was a mem psucha, there was a nurturance to the other side, nonetheless the other nations were subjugated beneath us. Like it says, like it says, his ruling is over all. That this is what our sages said in Gemara Rosh Hashanah, that the desert only refers to Jerusalem. Like it says, Zion Midbar Hayasa, that Zion became a desert. We know that it's known that Zion Yerushalayim who midas Malchus says Baruch, that Zion and Yerushalayim are Hashem's attribute of kingship. Maybe blessed Rakshakeshi Bashal Vas and Nikra Midbar Mloshin Yadber. Only that there's the other side to it. When it's in its peaceful state, it's also called Midbar from the language of conduct under us. But when it's destroyed, then Chas v'Shalom, then it's the other side of the other concept of Midbar, of desolation. But in the time of exile, our sages said, that we were exiled to Adam, the divine presence went with us. Besod Golus Hashchinim, with the concept of the exile of the divine presence, to give nurturance to them by force. And like the concept of Lama, like a sheep in front of her shearers, she's silent. So it's the concept of the nurturance of the mem in the time of exile. Vaz nikra midbar, then it's called a desert. Keretz midbar v'tziyah kiviyachol, then it's called a desert, like a desert that's desolate and dry and so forth. That the midbar and the desolation will rejoice. That is the land of Israel, which is now like a desert and desolate. Because the attribute of Hashem's kingship has descended down awesomely, lamata mata, very low, and the lowest levels, lashpia koltov l'sitra achra, to give all manner of good to the other side, to give them life and nurturance, and to give the sustenance to their house. And Israel is only nurturing from the what's left over, or the point of it, as is known. And as it is in the general concept of the world, so too it is in particular in the soul of man, that in the time of exile also the divine spark that's in the soul of man is in exile and entrapped in the physical body, and the thoughts of man and his plottings, and the thoughts and plans of man, in the inanities of the world, the concept of a desolate desert, which is not like it is during the time of the temple. Israel would receive, when we went up to the regel, to the temple, we had a revelation and a vision from above, like it says, like it says, all your males will see. And from this comes the attribute of love. That's what's called the masculine, which is a revelation of love from above. Like it says, the concept of kindness he remembered his kindness. But Zachar is also the masculine. The concept of masculine and kindness go together because it's a giving from above to below. But the purpose of this descent, of this divine spark in this exile, entrapped in the body, so to the general concept of the exile of the divine presence, in a desert, in desolation, all of this descent and the nurturance below is for the purpose of elevation. That is in order to purify and separate the bad from the animal soul. To separate it from the garments of Noga. Like it says, with all your hearts. That also the strength of desire in the animalistic soul, Yashuv la'avas havaya, will return to the love of Hashem. So the descent and the nurturance downwards is all for the purpose of elevating it upwards. For this purpose, the soul descended to this world to subjugate the animalistic soul and to elevate it, because the soul on its own does not need to be fixed. Now this elevation also needs to be in this way of midbar, and that is through speech of prayer, with flames of fire, midbar canal, that the speech is called the desert, like we said, like from the pasuk in Shir Hashirim, that your mouth is beautiful. And the reason for this, that the words of prayer are called the desert, who it is, because the concept of prayer needs to be with flames of fire and the crying out of the heart, like it says that their heart cried out. He calls manch in order to because until you awaken the love in prayer with flames of fire, until you desire to get out of the garments of Noga, that a person in their nature is mixed from good and bad. Even if a person does not actually do bad, it's because the bad is there, but it's sleeping by that person. But nonetheless, it's in his nature, in his ability, and in his natural state, until you separate it out with the flames of fiery love. Like it says in another place on the verse, that you have the crucible of silver and the pot for gold to purify gold, and each person according to their praise. That just like when a person places silver in a purifying pot with fire, the dregs are revealed, and separate out from the silver. So too, through the flames of love, is revealed the mixture of bad within their soul, and separates out. And the concept of the flames of fire, who it is, is that it should be in a state of thirsting, which is like the idea of the verse that my soul thirsts for you in a desolate land. And that's the concept of the desert. It's called the land that's dry and thirsty. That's where you have the thirst. So how do you compare the concept of prayer and speech of prayer to the desert, it's because of the thirst. Like you're in a desert. You're thirsting for Hashem from your place, in order to awaken flames of fire to separate out the good and bad from your soul, to separate out the bad from the good. And that's why it says, what Yehuda said about Tamar, take her out and burn her. Now sages said that this refers to the souls of Israel. Take her out into the exile, which is the exile of the divine presence, Midbar V'Tzia Canal, which is a desert and a desolate place, and then she will be burnt. That is with the flames of fire of love, because of the great hiding, the great hiding of godliness. Yet through this is great in the thirsting in a greater way, like it says in the song for David when he was in the desert of Yehuda. My soul thirsts for you, in the land that's desolate. So too in the holy I have gazed upon you, or I desire to gaze upon you like then. And it's explained the meaning in another place, the dafka midbar v'tzia, that specifically when he is in the desert and a desolate place, which is this idea of take out the souls of Israel into exile, as tigdal hatzimon b'yeser seis v'yeser az. Then the thirst will be greatened with a greater strength and a greater measure. This is why we translate this as, if it were only so that in the holy I would see you in this way. That we should merit to have this type of great love also when we are in the holy, when we're in a state of revelation of godliness. Lo bechinas midbar, and not in a state of desert. That's why we need to daven about this. Because the order of things are that specifically in a state of desert and desolation, the thirst will become greater. And this is that the elevation of the souls of Israel is through this concept of the desert. Like it says, who is this coming out of the desert? How do we get out of the desert? From who's elevating from the desert? That is through the midbar, through the diburi osios atfila, through the words and letters of prayer. With flames of fire and thirst. Now the concept of contemplation, which will bring you to this concept of thirst, that is in it and of it itself, this idea. Midbar, from the desert, because the concept of the desert, it's a concept of a salted land, lo zerua, that's not sown with seeds, it's not going to grow anything, because it does not have the life force of the ability of growth. It's, so to speak, a dead land. That's what it means, desolate. That's why you cannot use the sand from the desert to cover blood, because it does not have the koach hatzomeach. So it's interesting. So the blood is from the chai, and then underneath chai is tzomeach, and underneath that is domim. Now it would seem that when you cover the blood from the chai with the domim, there needs to also be the component of tzomeach there. And if it's not, I guess you're jumping one level. There's no memutza maybe. Because otherwise, what's the big deal? Why? What does it matter that it can't grow anything in that earth? At any rate, that's what a person has to place upon their heart. That even the higher worlds, until from the highest of levels until all the way down to the desert and desolation, and the inanimate completely, that do not have life force at all, in comparison to the Holy One, blessed be He. Because you created the heavens, and the heavens of the heavens, when you give life to them all. That He may be blessed as the life force for all worlds. And there's none other than Him, and completely not other than Him. And without Him, it would be as if it didn't exist at all. And so all of this contemplation, and that therefore He is called truth, because He alone is the true truth of existence. Which is not the case with all the other creations that do not have an existence, a true existence at all, because on their own they do not have any type of existence at all. Only divine life force which comes from Him may be blessed with mislabish b'hem is included in them. Like it says that you create them. Don't read it that you not only enliven them, but you're creating them. That's why it's called a desert and desolate in comparison to the Holy One, blessed be He. To the infinite may be blessed, because they don't exist without Him. They don't have any life of their own. They can't produce any growth on their own, only from the life that comes from the infinite. Now, the lower worlds of Bria, Tzira, Siyar are also called a desert and desolate in comparison to the world of Atzilus. And even the desert even the Garden of Eden is called a desert. That it's, like the pasuk says, that its desert will be like Eden. That hints to this idea. The Besifrei Kabbalah, the Bechinas Midbar Sin, Ugan Eden Shalamata, that it says that the desert of Sin, I guess the Chinese desert, is the lower Garden of Eden, the Garden of Eden below. Ubechinas Malchus de Atzilus Nikra Ir Moshav Lagabe Bia. And the concept of Malchus of Atzilus is called the city of dwelling in comparison to Bria Tzirasiya, which is like a desert in comparison. Knodib Inyan Ir Elokeinu, as is known, the concept of the city of our God. It's the concept of the letters of Malchus of Atzilus, that the letters produce houses which make a city. It's the concept of דיבור Ha'elyon of Malchus of Atzilus. So what's below it, that doesn't have the city, it's a desert. But in comparison to the infinite may be blessed, all is called a desert, including Malchus of Atzilus, not just a biyah in comparison. Now it's written B'Yirmiyah Beis, Bamidbar, in the desert, Be'eretz lo avar ba'ish, in a land that no man has passed through, V'lo yashav adam sham, and no man has dwelled there. Mevua Perish b'makom acher, and it's explained the meaning of this in another place. The Inyan Bechinas Midbar Zeh, that this desert that it's talking about where no man has been there, that's a very high level of desert. that's higher than the concept of even supernal man, that's upon the throne of honor. That's why it says that Adam has not sat there, because it's even higher than the throne, where Adam, the Adam Shalakise sits, the concept of the Adam Alakise. So this is the highest concept of desert, beyond man, beyond all revelation. Meaning, I guess, that it's desolate and devoid of creation because it's beyond it. Because the gradative process of the 10 spheros, the supernal 10 spheros, the Atzilus, Gimel Kavin, that in Atzilus, you have these spheros that come in three lanes. Chesed Yamuna Yamina, the kindness is the right arm. Hanikra Parsuf Adam. So those spheros are called the construct of man. But there's a concept that's above the 10 spheros. That's called the desire of all desires. That is the supernal will that's beyond wisdom. That's the concept of the desert. That's higher than the concept of man, where there's no concept of division into different parts of the body conceptually. Midbar, it's also called the desert, that does not sprout, or that you cannot sow or sprout. What does that mean? That you don't have any changes there. That the concept of growth means that it sprouts from small to big. That's the concept of tzomeach. That the concept of plowing and sowing and cutting the grains, it's the concept of something small, vigadlusful, and something big. The concept of how you have small revelations, great revelations, different levels. V'gam nikra bechina zu midbar, and this concept is also called the desert, lashon דיבור, the concept of speech. Because these four levels of the inanimate plant, animal, and speaker, that's written, that the wisdom enlivens, that the concept of chokhmah is the level of chai, of the animal. And the emotions are called the growth. And the supernal will above, midbar, is the concept of the desert, or medber, the speaker, shumekor hadibur, which is the source of speech, sod keser malchus, the concept of the crown of malchus, the crown of speech, the source of speech, keser malchus. So that's the concept of medber being the highest. But it's nonetheless still called a desert, in the simplest sense, lashon shmama, of desolation. Because in comparison to the infinite, may be blessed. Because in comparison to the infinite, this desert, also this high level of desert, which is much higher than Atzilus, shmama mama shichashiv, is nonetheless still considered desolation in comparison to the infinite. Like it says in Tikunim Kisrei La, that the supernal crown of Al-Gavdi Ortzach, even though it is a pure light, Ukam Hu Kadam Ilasa Ilos, it is darkness in comparison to the source of sources. Like it says in another place, the concept of that he does awesomeness, that even the concept of Pella, which is awesome, Pella Elyon, the supernal wonder of Keser, Nechshav L'Asiya, it's considered an action. Ose Pella, Gashmi is physically, just like physicality, Etzlo is Barak in comparison to him, maybe less. That the highest level of Keser and the lowest level of physicality is all one in comparison to him. And this is what it says, that he conducts you in the awesome and great desert. the Hagadol Vanor him Madrigus Gvos, so that the awesome and great are very high levels. How can we say these levels to describe the desert of the nations, which is a place of nurturance of the external? Because it's not necessarily referring to that kind of desert, or it's referring to this high kind of desert, the desert of Godel and Nora. Asher lo yashav Adam sham, where even Adam ha'elyon doesn't sit there, where even Adam doesn't sit there. Shu be'emes Godel v'Nora, which is truly great and awesome. Shari hu l'mayla mayla me'b'chinas Adam de le'elachulu, that it's higher, much higher from the concept of the supernal man. Ad shelo yashav Adam sham klal, to the point where you do not have man sitting there at all. Liosuram nizgav mimenu, because it is high and exalted from him, from the Adam ha'elyon. Because about this level it says that he's not a man. Nonetheless, in comparison to the infinite, maybe blessed, it's called a desolate desert of Keser. And that's the concept of and awesome. Which is the concept of fear and nullification. From this you can understand what it says in the Torah, that from the desert you get the gift. That the gift of Chochmah comes from the desert of Keser, where man does not sit there. But that's the external concept of Torah, which is the supernal will. But the inner part of the Torah is the pleasure of the king on his own. Like it says, I will be by him a pleasure. Like it says in another place. So the external part of the Torah is like this concept of man, below the concept of the desert. But the internal concept, the deeper part of the Torah is on the level of Hashem's pleasure, deeper than that.